So I wanted to chat today about life with high school. I got my first horse in junior high and then upgraded. I advanced beyond him and bought actually the horse I'd been taking lessons on and went to a school that did have a sports requirement. But I managed to convince the athletic director that riding was a sport, which, hats off to me for being persuasive. But the school that I was at was very, very demanding academically, and there just was a lot of pressure during school. And yet I did figure out a way to keep riding. And also, I had to still work on the side to figure out how to at least support some of the costs of my horse. So it definitely was a full load. But, I think my point is that where there's a will, there's a way. I was really, really determined to keep riding through school and didn't want to give it up. And, when I went to college, that was the line in the sand for my parents. They were like, "You're not taking a horse to college." So I actually sold that horse that I had all through high school for $600. I think I bought her for 400 and sold her for six or something like that. She was super green when I bought her. And when I sold her, she was very schooled and very well trained, and actually went to someone in New Hampshire and ended up taking that rider to A-level pony club, which was pretty cool. But I think my message today is, where there is a will, there is a way. And I obviously was in a different decade. This was 1978 when I sold her for 600. And I'm pretty sure she was a remount mare. She came from out west. I don't think those horses are still around. She actually had very good conformation. She was a natural jumper. I was not. She was the horse that made me decide dressage was what I wanted to focus on, because I took her into a super baby green junior hunter. And back then it was at Norfolk Hunt. It was out in their hunt field. It was over natural obstacles, a 5-acre field, a real stone wall with a real tree on the top, a real chicken coop, real stuff. And we went around that course like it was a speed trial. And I came out of that white knuckled and said, "I'm not doing that again," and have to figure out a different way to ride. And that's really when I started. I found a woman who was British Horse Society, who started coming to my house, and about once a month was all I could afford, and giving me dressage lessons. And I didn't get it at all for a long, long time. But my horse was well trained anyway by the time we were done, because she managed to get through the horse, even though she didn't get through to me. But there are times in our lives. I've certainly had seasons where I've had to take off from horses, for sure, and it's been challenging. But one of the things that I've learned in my career, I'm very entrepreneurial. I've had my own business for about 35 years now, and so that involves a lot of working on your own headspace. And anything that you do really requires that you work on your headspace, because it's very, very easy to think that circumstances control you instead of realizing you determine your circumstances. And it takes a lot of mindset work to get comfortable with that. I'm not always comfortable with it, for sure. But in terms of the riding, you just have to be willing to assume that whatever's going on is your responsibility. And if it's going to be, it's up to me, is really where the mindset has to be. And when I was in high school, I had a lot of pressure to go to a very competitive college. There was a lot of pressure academically. I was a good organized student, but I wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. And so I had to work really hard. Now, my best friend, who was also a rider, ended up graduating first in our class in high school, and then was valedictorian of her class at Harvard. So, my peer group was definitely a very high bar. I remember both of us taking calculus, and I ended up switching because I just couldn't get it, and she aced it. So, and it wasn't just calculus. She was fluent in French, fluent in German. She's a brilliant person, right? But I had to work harder, and it just took more time. And somehow I just was at peace with that process, that it was okay, that I had to work a little harder. And I think that I also didn't do stuff like I wasn't on the A circuit. I wasn't running around going to all the fancy shows, but I was okay with that. And it just is one of those things where sometimes if you really want to do the horses, you have to look at it a little differently and decide, what is it that you're doing it for? Why are you doing it? And for me, it really was that personal growth of having a connection with a horse, having communication, and having the ability to have two-way communication. And that's really been a theme all the way through. But that takes time. And so it certainly has been a priority of mine to figure out a way to have the time with the horses. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. But, just take a look if spending time with your horse is something that you want to have more of, you just want to be able to do that more often. What's sacred that you can get rid of? And in my case in high school, sports were not only sacred, they were required. And so I just got a little tough on that, made an appointment with the athletic director, and basically my argument was, hey, you can't compete the football team on a Saturday after not having practiced all week. You need your practices all week. I need the same time with my horse. I need to be riding 6 days a week in order to be competitive and advance. And by putting it in terms that he could relate to, because he was the football coach, he understood that I needed my afternoons. I needed to be able to not be doing sports at school, team sports, but be able to get home when we had an hour of light. I didn't have an indoor. And so I had to figure that out. So think outside the box. Sometimes just asking for what you want is enough. And getting yourself in the headspace where you can ask is another journey. And I'll speak to that a little bit, because there are some great people that I'm following, and also some great mentors that have supported me in my journey, both professionally and also with the horses. And I'll share, because they've got great stuff that really will support you, not just with the horses, but in all aspects of your life. So just wanted to do that quick message and give you that encouragement that, where there's a will, there's a way. Think outside the box, ask for what you want. And if you need a cheerleader before you ask, message me. I'm happy to cheer you on. I'm here for you.